Take a moment to conjure an image in your mind's eye of a person that you would describe as great. Not good, not pretty good, not really good, but great. The chances are high that this person's greatness can be traced back to their unique way of thinking about the world and their place within it. It is also likely that this person consistently values long-term consequences over short-term sacrifices. Companies are no different. The leaders of the greatest companies have a unique perspective regarding their company's role in the world's socio-economic ecosystem. Further, they consistently make decisions that reflect allegiance to future generations of employees, customers, and investors. According to Rosabeth Moss Kanter, the distinction between great companies and their less great counterparts is the type of logic they use in making strategic decisions. More specifically, great companies engage in institutional logic compared to the more commonplace and stereotypical corporate logic, known as financial logic. Financial logic is an outgrowth and relic of the mid-20th century emphasis on providing shareholder value as measured by stock price, dividends, and short-term earnings growth. This logic views companies as money-making machines to serve their investors, no more and no less. Ancillary issues such as employee satisfaction and development, environmental responsibility, community support, and social values are priorities only to the extent that they directly contribute to short-term earnings. Institutional logic views the success of a company in the context of long-term responsibilities to employees, customers, the community, society, and the environment. Short-term earnings are certainly not considered irrelevant, but they are viewed as a means to the ends of longevity, sustainability, and innovation, not an end unto themselves. Kanter contends that institutional logic manifests itself in 6 key attributes: a common purpose, a long-term focus, emotional engagement, partnering with the public, innovation, and self-organization. A common purpose. It has been said that the only thing constant is change. Given the increasingly dynamic nature of the 21st century business climate, change is a reality as certain as death and taxes. Companies shift strategies frequently. These shifts in strategy must have significant cultural and institutional consequences, right? Not so fast. The magnitude of the cultural consequences of these changes is largely dependent on the cultural identity of a company. If a company's identity is handcuffed to its specific product lines, marketing tactics, organizational structure, or leadership team, then there will be significant changes to the company culture as these factors vary and fluctuate. However, great companies tie their company identity to fewer fleeting variables that serve as a stronger foundation to withstand the winds of change. These variables are better known as values. These values are steadfast, even in the face of drastic operational change. These values serve as bright beacons that guide company leaders towards sustainable, responsible, and consistent decisions. Values also form the foundation of developing a company's purpose. Great companies with institutional logic and grounding understand their purpose extends beyond quarterly earnings, market share, or acquisitions. Great companies develop a vision of their purpose that motivates, inspires, and retains employees, because the vision allows them to feel connected to their communities, society, and the planet. A long-term focus. Greatness is a marathon, not a sprint. In order for companies to embrace a long-term perspective above the alluring temptations of short-term gain, a company must view itself as a social institution versus a financial institution. Without this perspective, companies would not have the intestinal fortitude required to accept short-term sacrifices for the sake of moving toward their corporate purpose. Great companies recognize that the scoreboard that they're playing for does not measure success in days, months, or even years, but rather decades. This mentality requires accepting a reality that companies operating with financial logic will never accept. That is, not every strategic decision is spreadsheetable. To those operating with financial logic, this statement is nothing less than heresy. To those operating with institutional logic, however, This acceptance represents a long-term competitive advantage. Emotional engagement. The late great comedian George Carlin once said, "Most people work just hard enough not to get fired and get paid just enough money not to quit." Mr. Carlin strikes a nerve with this comment, but is he right? For companies that rely on financial logic exclusively, his comment is neither particularly funny nor offensive. It's just a statement of fact. To these companies, wages are transactions devoid of meaning or emotions. These companies wouldn't pay more than market value for their utility bill, so why would they pay more than market value for labor? Financial logic views labor as binary. The individual and the company are simply executing a free market transaction, wherein labor is exchanged for the market rate of that labor. Further, the net present value of any employee must be greater than zero to support continued employment. Companies that embrace their roles as social institutions know something that other companies do not. Specifically, labor is not binary and performance is not devoid of emotion. This secret has the advantage of being a win for both parties. Employees that feel connected to their company's mission and values are emotionally engaged at work. These employees will rise to increasingly higher levels of performance without the threat of a stick or the temptation of a carrot. Not only are the employees happier, but the company reaps the benefits of their sustained superior performance. Partnering with the public. Great companies understand that the global economy of the 21st century is increasingly expecting that companies join as full contact participants with the public to tackle social projects in their communities. Previously, the public-private partnership itch could be scratched with tax-deductible donations, complete with a giant-sized check delivered by executives for the obligatory photo op. Great companies recognize that the public is a vested stakeholder in corporate activities that should not be placated with empty gestures. Great companies roll up their sleeves and tackle the toughest social challenges side by side with the public. They do this because they recognize that societal interests and corporate interests aren't separate. They are inextricably linked. Innovation. Mark Twain once said, "What you do speaks so loudly that I can't hear a word that you're saying." The same can be said about company values. Posting company values on the conference room walls does very little to bring those values to life. However, the decisions made in that very same conference room reveal a company's true core values. Company executives vote with their time, resources, and attention. If serving the communities in which their company operates is a true corporate value, the company's actions will obviously reflect that value. If encouraging innovation is a true corporate value, the company's actions will obviously reflect that value. Interestingly, and less obvious, is the intersection of these two values. If necessity is the mother of invention, it should come as no surprise that the most innovative companies are those companies that best define the needs of the markets that they serve. What better way to identify these needs than to integrate and involve employees in their communities? Self-organization. Steve Jobs once said, "It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do." The greatest companies recognize that the real intellectual firepower is not concentrated at the top of the organizational chart. The best ideas are likely to come from those who are closest to the work, the customer, and the market. The further one climbs the organizational pyramid, the more one should be focused on creating the proper environment for these ideas to bubble to the surface, and less on creating new ideas themselves. This is counterintuitive for many companies, but the greatest companies have known this secret for decades. This idea can be extrapolated beyond the creation of new ideas. The collective knowledge of the organization will create the strongest and most efficient communication methodologies and protocols, the most impactful networks which may or may not align with the existing team structures, and the most effective resource allocation strategies. Executives need not burden themselves with answering all of these challenges. Rather, they should burden themselves with the question of how best to empower the organization to self-organize, which often maximizes creativity, engagement, and institutional logic. The greatest companies think and act differently. These differences are rooted in the way that they define the role of the corporation in society. Companies that engage in institutional logic believe that companies can and should be the strongest pillars in society's progressive and incremental journey towards solving its most challenging problems.